The rain wasn't just falling, it was weeping. For 3 long days and longer nights it had poured from a sky the color of old bruises, a relentless cold lament. The elders of the Moonhaven Pack said it they were about to do to me. I stood in the shadowed corner of the great assembly hall, the stone walls seeming to press in on all sides. My dress, thin and worn, clung to my damp skin despite the fire roaring in the hearth. I could feel the chill deep in my bones, a chill no flame could touch. The air was thick with the smell of wet wolf fur, with the sharp, sour scent of anxiety, and with the heavy musk of too many predators packed into one room, their fear leaking through their human skins. They were deciding my fate, again. But this time felt final. My name is Alara, and in the Moonhaven Pack I was a ghost long before they decided to send me to my grave. At 23, I was the weakest Omega our pack had ever produced. A mistake, a disappointment that should have faded after its first pathetic shift. My wolf, she was less a presence and more a faint echo, a whisper of instinct where there should have been a roar. While other Omegas could calm raging tempers with a soft word, my presence only seemed to make tensions worse. I was too small, too quiet, too human. A fragile flower in a forest of thorns and claws. The Alpha's decree is absolute. Alpha Boran's voice sliced through the murmuring crowd, harsh and final as a slamming door. He stood at the head of the hall, his figure imposing, his face set in grim lines. 1 Omega, a bride to seal our allegiance, a symbol of our submission to his rule over the northern reaches. He must have his tribute. I pressed myself tighter against the cold stone wall, wishing it would swallow me whole. My fingers traced a crack in the mortar, clinging to its rough reality as my world dissolved into a nightmare. A voice rose from the crowd. "We should send Anya. She's beautiful, graceful, beloved, our finest Omega. Surely such a gift would please him, would secure his favor." My heart, which had been a trapped bird in my chest, gave a frantic flutter. Anya. Of course, perfect Anya. But another voice, colder, more calculating, cut in. "Are you mad? Anya is promised to Beta Kale's son. She is the future of our bloodline. We cannot give her away." The debate swirled, names tossed into the air like stones. Mary, Liana, Flora, any of the valued ones. I held my breath, a desperate, foolish hope kindling in my chest. Maybe they would send someone strong. Maybe they would see the sense in offering their best. Then the voice of Councilman Jareth, thin and sharp as a razor, cut through the noise. It should be Alara. My name. It dropped into the sudden silence like a corpse into a grave. The air left my lungs. I looked up, my eyes finding his across the crowded room. Jareth's gaze was like winter frost, his lips twisted in a smile that held no warmth. He had hated me since the day of my presentation, when my failure had outshone his own glorious success. "Think on it," his tone continued, oily with false reason. "The Alpha King knows nothing of our pack's inner workings. He demanded an Omega. Alara is unmated, unbonded, a blank space in our lineage." He paused, letting the cruelty settle. "And let us be honest, she is no loss to our strength. No loss at all. No loss." Then I saw them. 3 figures, standing as still as statues just beyond the border stone, in the space that was no longer mine. The Lycan King's escort. Even from here I could feel the difference. They were larger, their power a tangible force that vibrated the very air. My weak wolf whimpered inside me, curling into a ball of pure terror. Beta Kale walked me to the line. "For what it is worth," he said quietly, his voice rough, "I hope you find more than what we gave you here." It was the first true kindness I'd heard in years, and it almost broke me. "Thank you," I managed, the words tearing from my throat. And then I stepped across the border. The moment my foot touched the foreign soil, the Lycans moved. They were before me in a blur of impossible speed, and I stumbled back with a gasp. A woman with a scar across her cheek and dark, watchful eyes caught my arm to steady me. "Easy," her voice said, lower than I expected, threaded with strength. "I am Captain Varia. This is Commander Rylan and Lieutenant Calum. We are your escort to King Thorin." I clutched my bag like a shield, my heart hammering against my ribs. Rylan, a mountain of a man with copper hair and a scrutinizing gaze, frowned deeply. "Is this the Omega?" he asked, his disbelief not aimed at me, but at Beta Kale, who still stood on our side of the line. "Moonhaven has sent an Omega as demanded," Kale replied, his voice carefully neutral. Calum, lean and silent like a shadow, studied me. "She is slight." Varia's eyes narrowed, but she turned to me. "Can you travel? The capital is 3 days on foot." "I can travel," I whispered. What choice did I have? There was no going back. The line was crossed. My old life was already disappearing behind me, swallowed by the mist and the trees. As we walked into the deep, ancient forest, away from everything I had ever known, Captain Varia fell into step beside me. "So, your real name, not just the Omega." "Elara." "Elara," she repeated. "And your pack just let you volunteer for this?" A sound escaped me, a short, sharp, bitter laugh that surprised even me. "Volunteer? No, they chose me because I'm expendable. They are sending you their insult wrapped in a pretty package. They believe I'm too broken to be of any use, and when I fail, as they are certain I will, it will be their quiet, clever defiance against your king." I braced for anger, for immediate rejection, but the 3 Lycans simply exchanged a long, unreadable look. Lieutenant Calum spoke, his voice like cool water. "You speak of your failure as if it is preordained." "When everyone you have ever known agrees on what you are," I said, staring at the path ahead, "it becomes the only truth you know." "And what truth do you believe?" Captain Varia asked, softly. The question stunned me. No one had ever asked me that before, what I believed. I took a shaky breath. "I believe I'm about to discover if they were right about me all along." Commander Rylan made a grunt that might have been approval. Honest, that's more than we usually get from pack politics. He gestured forward. "Come, the king does not like to be kept waiting." And as we moved deeper into the unknown, a single thought coiled in my mind, a spark in the endless dark of my fear. What if the Lycan king was nothing like the monster from the stories? What if my end was actually a beginning? The forest grew deeper, the trees ancient sentinels whose branches wove a canopy that turned the world. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture that was nothing like the one painted by Moonhaven's fear. A king who collected broken things and made them into a kingdom. "He values loyalty," Varia said, her eyes on me, "and honesty. Above all else, honesty. You were truthful about why you were sent. That matters, more than you know." Hope, that treacherous vine, began to twine around the barren tree of my heart, but I crushed it. This could still be a trick, a kinder path to the same execution. We made camp as dusk painted the sky in violets and deep blues. Rylan built a fire with swift efficiency, while Calum disappeared and returned with a plump hair. I moved to help, but Varia shook her head. "You are a guest, Elara, not a servant. Rest." So I watched them. They moved in a seamless dance of long familiarity, teasing and joking with a rough affection. They were a unit, a family forged in exile, and for a moment I felt a pang of such profound loneliness it stole my breath. I had never belonged like that, not ever. As we ate the simple, savory meat, Varia told me of the capital, Valerius, not just of its soaring black stone towers, but of its bustling markets, its libraries filled with knowledge from across the realms, its healing halls that welcomed any in need. "It is a place of order," Calum added, "but not oppression. The law is clear, and it applies to the highest lord and the lowest laborer. That is Thorin's first rule." "And his second?" I asked, drawn in despite myself. Rylan smirked. "Don't waste what is useful. A lesson your pack failed spectacularly." The night deepened, the fire popping and sending sparks toward a sky now thick with stars. The forest was alive with sounds, but here, in our small circle of light, it felt safe, a dangerous feeling. "Tomorrow," Varya said, her gaze holding mine in the flickering light, "we will crest the Serpent's Ridge. You will see Valerius for the first time. Remember this, Ilara. You walk into a den of predators, yes, but you are not their prey. You are under the king's protection now. That shield is stronger than any armor." I nodded, wrapping my arms around myself. Under the king's protection. A shield I had done nothing to earn, given by a man I had never met. As I lay in my bedroll staring at the impossible tapestry of stars, Captain Varya's final words from the day echoed in my mind. "Your pack thought they were sending a message of defiance. What they actually sent was a question, and I am very curious to hear the king's answer." A question? Was I a worthless insult, or was I something else, something they had all been too blind to see? The answer waited in Valerius, and for the first time in my life, as fear churned in my gut, something else stirred alongside it, a tiny, defiant ember of anticipation. Tomorrow I would meet the storm, and I would learn if I was meant to be swept away, or if I could learn to stand in the rain. The climb to Serpent's Ridge was a brutal test of my endurance. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I pushed on, driven by a desperate need to see, and by the unspoken expectation of my escorts, who moved up the steep path with infuriating ease. Just as I thought I could not take another step, Captain Varya reached back, her hand firm around my wrist, and pulled me the final distance to the crest. "Look," she said, her voice hushed with what I realized was pride. I looked, and the world fell away. Spread across the valley below, cradled between two jagged mountain ranges that scraped the sky, was the city of Valerius. It was not just a city, it was a living fortress carved from the mountain's very— He was taller than even Rylan, with broad shoulders that tapered to a lean waist. He wore simple dark trousers and a white linen shirt, the sleeves rolled to his forearms. His hair was the color of raven's wings, slightly too long, brushing his collar. Even from behind, power radiated from him, not the wild, snapping energy of an alpha in a rage, but a deep, thrumming current, like the heart of the earth itself. He was a contained storm. He did not turn immediately. He stood perfectly still, watching something outside, letting the silence stretch. Could he smell my fear? Could he sense the pathetic flutter of my wolf cowering deep inside? Finally he spoke, still gazing out the window. "Ilara." He said my name as if testing its weight. "Come forward." My legs obeyed, carrying me into the center of the room. I stopped, my eyes fixed on the intricate pattern of the rug beneath my boots. "Look at me." It was not a shout, it was a command, quiet and absolute, and it pulled my gaze up as surely as a hooked chain. He turned. The stories did not do him justice. He was not old, perhaps in his early 30s, with a face that was all sharp, elegant angles, a blade of a nose, a strong jaw shadowed with dark stubble, a mouth set in a stern line. But it was his eyes that trapped me. They were not gold or amber of most wolves. They were a pale, piercing silver gray, like winter ice under a midnight moon. Intelligent, penetrating, they saw everything. Those remarkable eyes swept over me, taking in my worn dress, my travel-mussed hair, my white-knuckled grip on my pitiful bag. His expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in that silver depth. Not disgust, not anger, curiosity. "You are the Omega Moonhaven sent as their finest offering," he stated. It was not a question. I swallowed, my throat dust dry. "Moonhaven sent the only Omega they considered expendable, Your Majesty." One dark eyebrow lifted, just a fraction. "Expendable? They believe I am defective, too weak to be of use to you. They expect me to fail." The words tumbled out, the brutal truth I had given my escorts. Honesty was my only currency. "My failure will be their quiet rebellion, a broken gift for a powerful king." King Thorin did not move. He did not speak. The silence in the sun-drenched library became a physical pressure, squeezing the air from my lungs. I waited for the explosion, for the roar of outrage, for the guards to be summoned to drag the insult away. Then he did something utterly unexpected. He laughed. It was a short, sharp sound of genuine, surprised amusement. He walked to his desk, his fingers drumming once on the polished wood. "Clever," he murmured, though he wasn't speaking to me. "They send me an insult wrapped in obedience. And you," he turned those piercing eyes back to me, "are honest about it. Why?" "Because lying would be pointless. You would have discovered the truth. Then I would be both defective and dishonest. At least this way, I am only one of those things." "Defective," he repeated, the word flat. "That is how you see yourself." "It is the only way I have ever been taught to see, Your Majesty." He studied me for a long, agonizing moment. Then he gestured to a high-backed chair near the fire. "Sit." I perched on the very edge, poised for flight. He took the chair opposite, leaning back with a casual dominance that made him seem even more dangerous. "Your pack values strength as a singular thing, the strength of the claw, the fang." "A simple room would be—" "Nonsense!" Mirren bustled over to a wardrobe and flung it open. Inside hung gowns in shades of moss green, slate blue, and dusky rose, simple in cut but made of fabric so fine they seemed to drink the light. "The king's orders were very specific. You are to be comfortable. You are to feel safe." Safe. The word felt foreign, a luxury I had never known. A hot bath was drawn in an adjoining room, and for the first time in my life I submerged myself in water that did not come from a cold stream. The heat seeped into my bones, washing away the grime of the journey, but not the stains of memory. After, wrapped in a robe softer than mist, Mirren insisted on dressing me in one of the gowns, the moss-green one that made my silver-blonde hair seem less ghostly and more like moonlight. When I looked in the full-length mirror, a stranger stared back. The dress fit as if woven for me, hugging curves I'd spent a lifetime hiding. My clean hair fell in a smooth, pale cascade. I didn't look like a valued Omega, but I didn't look like a ghost anymore either. "There," Mirren said with satisfaction. "Now you look like you belong." The words were a kindness, but they ignited a fresh spark of panic. Belong? Here? Amongst these stones of tower and these people of fierce grace? The feeling was a lie waiting to be exposed. My first dinner in the keep was a quiet affair in my chambers, but Mirren delivered the next day's schedule with an apologetic smile. "Court breakfast, my lady, in the Hall of Echoes. His Majesty wishes you to attend." The Hall of Echoes, the name alone was a threat. The next morning, dressed in a deep sapphire blue gown, I followed Mirren through the bustling heart of the keep. The hall lived to its name, a cavernous space of black marble and vaulted arches where every whisper, every clink of cutlery echoed into a soft, pervasive roar. Long tables radiated from a raised dais where the high tables stood. And there, at the center of that table, sat King Thorin. He was in midnight blue and silver today, a circlet of dark metal resting on his brow. He looked every inch the untouchable monarch, his silver gaze sweeping the room with detached authority. My steps faltered. Mirren gave my arm an encouraging squeeze and melted away. Every head turned as I entered. Conversations died mid-sentence. The weight of hundreds of eyes, curious, hostile, calculating, pressed down on me. I felt the old urge to shrink, to fade into the wall. Then the king stood. The hall fell utterly silent. "Ilara," his voice carried, clear and resonant, "join us." He gestured not to a lower table, but to an empty seat at the high table itself. On his left, the place of honor, a statement as blatant as a banner. A fresh wave of whispers broke out. I walked forward, my spine straight with terror, focusing on the pattern in the marble floor. When I reached the dais, King Thorin himself pulled out the chair for me. The gesture sent another ripple of shock through the hall. "Thank you, Your Majesty," I whispered, sitting. "Thorin," his voice low, for my ears alone, "at least at this table, the formality is exhausting." I glanced up, startled, and saw a faint, genuine smile touch his lips before he returned to his regal composure. The meal began, a dizzying parade of exquisite dishes. I ate. "Moonhaven's standards are indeed singular, my lady," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "They value only one kind of strength. Fortunately, King Thorin's kingdom seems to recognize others." Celine's perfect smile froze. Thorin's tension shifted subtly into something like pride. "How philosophical," Celine said, her tone icing over. "One hopes such philosophy is enough to survive the realities of this court. It can be unforgiving to those who do not understand its ways. Then it is fortunate I am here to ensure Ilara learns them," Thorin said, his voice dropping into a register of quiet, unmistakable threat, "and to ensure those ways include courtesy to all under my protection. Do you understand, Lady Celine?" The woman paled, the mask slipping for a heartbeat to reveal sheer, furious shock. She recovered quickly, bowing her head. "Perfectly, Your Majesty. My apologies. I merely wished to welcome our new guest." With a final icy glance at me, she swept away. The silence she left behind was thick. Thorin let out a slow breath. "I am sorry. That will not be the last such encounter." "You defended me," I said, stunned. "I defended what is right," he said simply. Then he looked at me, and the storm in his eyes softened into something warmer, more curious. "And you defended yourself. You see, the strength is there." He left me then in the winter garden, with the murmur of the fountain and the echo of his words. Lady Celine's hostility was a clear shadow, a warning of the battles within these walls. But Thorin's belief, that was a new kind of light. And for the first time, standing alone in the cold, beautiful garden, I didn't feel entirely like a ghost. I felt like a seed buried deep in frozen ground, wondering with a terrifying sliver of hope what might happen if I dared to grow. The days began to find a rhythm, a strange, beautiful cadence that was nothing like the harsh, predictable beat of life in Moonhaven. Mornings were for the Hall of Echoes, where I learned to eat under scrutiny without choking. Afternoons belonged to Master Orin in the healing halls, where the scent of herbs and poultices replaced the scent of fear. My hands, which had only ever known how to tremble or hide, learned to grind roots, measure tinctures, and bind wounds with a steady patience that surprised even me. But my sanctuary, my true haven, was the library. It was there, on the third afternoon, that I found the book. I had been searching for a text on frostblight, a fungus that could poison winter-stored grains, when my fingers brushed against a spine that felt different, older, bound in a leather that was soft as velvet and dark as a starless night. No title was stamped on it. Curiosity, that newly awakened beast, pulled it from the shelf. It was a journal, not a printed book, but a handwritten chronicle. The script was elegant, flowing, but the ink was faded with great age. The first page bore a single sentence, written in a bold, decisive hand. To build a throne from broken things, one must first believe the broken things have value. My breath caught. I turned the page carefully. Day 47 in the wilds. Found Calum today. The boy is more shadow than wolf, but the fire in his eyes, it is not rage, it is a will to live that refuses to be extinguished. I offered me my last crust of bread. He did not take it. He asked what I wanted in return.
Moonhaven's standards are indeed singular, my lady, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. They value only one kind of strength. Fortunately, King Thorin's kingdom seems to recognize others. Celine's perfect smile froze. Thorin's tension shifted subtly into something like pride. How philosophical, Celine said, her tone icing over. One hopes such philosophy is enough to survive the realities of this court. It can be unforgiving to those who do not understand its ways. Then it is fortunate I am here to ensure Alara learns them, Thorin said, his voice dropping into a register of quiet, unmistakable threat, and to ensure those ways include courtesy to all under my protection. Do you understand, Lady Celine? The woman paled, the mask slipping for a heartbeat to reveal sheer, furious shock. She recovered quickly, bowing her head. Perfectly, Your Majesty. My apologies. I merely wished to welcome our new guest. With a final icy glance at me, she swept away. The silence she left behind was thick. Thorin let out a slow breath. I am sorry. That will not be the last such encounter. You defended me, I said, stunned. I defended what is right, he said simply. Then he looked at me, and the storm in his eyes softened into something warmer, more curious. And you defended yourself. You see, the strength is there. He left me then in the winter garden, with the murmur of the fountain and the echo of his words. Lady Celine's hostility was a clear shadow, a warning of the battles within these walls. But Thorin's belief, that was a new kind of light. And for the first time, standing alone in the cold, beautiful garden, I didn't feel entirely like a ghost. I felt like a seed buried deep in frozen ground, wondering, with a terrifying sliver of hope, what might happen if I dared to grow. The days began to find a rhythm, a strange, beautiful cadence that was nothing like the harsh, predictable beat of life in Moonhaven. Mornings were for the Hall of Echoes, where I learned to eat under scrutiny without choking. Afternoons belonged to Master Orin in the healing halls, where the scent of herbs and poultices replaced the scent of fear. My hands, which had only ever known how to tremble or hide, learned to grind roots, measure tinctures, and bind wounds with a steady patience that surprised even me. But my sanctuary, my true haven, was the library. It was there, on the third afternoon, that I found the book. I had been searching for a text on frostblight, a fungus that could poison winter-stored grains, when my fingers brushed against a spine that felt different, older, bound in a leather that was soft as velvet and dark as a starless night. No title was stamped on it. Curiosity, that newly awakened beast, pulled it from the shelf. It was a journal, not a printed book, but a handwritten chronicle. The script was elegant, flowing, but the ink was faded with great age. The first page bore a single sentence, written in a bold, decisive hand. To build a throne from broken things, one must first believe the broken things have value. My breath caught. I turned the page carefully. Day 47 in the wilds. Found Calum today. The boy is more shadow than wolf, but the fire in his eyes, it is not rage. It is a will to live that refuses to be extinguished. I offered him my last crust of bread. He did not take it. He asked what I wanted in return. We built it, he corrected firmly, turning fully to face me. Varia, Rylan, Calum, Orin, Mirren, Every broken thing that found its way here added a stone to the wall, a thread to the tapestry. That is the only magic this kingdom possesses, belief in second chances. He reached out then, slowly, and tapped the cover of the journal with one finger. This is my truth, Ilara, the unvarnished, unkingly truth, and now you know it. His eyes held mine, serious and intent. Does it frighten you to know the foundation of this mighty keep is just a collection of lost souls and stubborn hope? I thought of Moonhaven's truth, a truth of strength, hierarchy, and cold utility, a truth that had left me starving in a corner. I looked at this man, this king who carried his past doubts in a book on a public shelf, who valued a healer's knowledge as much as a warrior's sword. No, I said, and I realized with certainty it was true. It doesn't frighten me. It gives me hope. A real, full smile touched his lips then, transforming his stern features into something breathtaking. Good. He stood, straightening his tunic. Then I will leave you to your reading, but a word of advice. He leaned down slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratory murmur. The entry about the time Rylan tried to cook a fish without cleaning it first is on page 82. It is significantly more amusing than the political musings. He winked. Actually winked. Then he turned and walked back toward the door, leaving me sitting there, clutching his most private thoughts to my heart, my own thoughts whirling like leaves in a gale. I was still sitting there an hour later, the journal opened to a less intense passage about border trade routes, when a different, colder shadow fell over me. Cozying up with history, I see. Lady Celine stood a few feet away, having approached as silently as a stalking cat. Her gaze fell upon the journal in my lap, and her perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. How industrious of you. That is a rare volume, the Majesty's early writings. He is very protective of it. Her crysty blue eyes lifted to mine, sharp with insinuation. He must trust you great deal, or perhaps he simply pities you enough to grant you access to his sentimental relics. The warm glow Thorin had left evaporated. This was the court politics he'd warned me about, the poison in the honey. The king was just sharing some of the kingdom's founding principles, I said, keeping my voice level. I closed the book, setting it carefully beside me. Principles, Celine repeated, her smile a razor's edge. How noble. Tell me, do you think those principles will protect you when the realities of this place become inconvenient, when the king's political needs shift? She took a step closer, her perfume, something cloying and expensive, washing over me. You are a message to the northern Pax, little Omega. Once that message is received and understood, what use are you? A defective wolf with no pack, no power, taking up space in the royal library. Her words were meant to wound, to resurrect every fear Moonhaven had planted, and they did. They found the old tender bruises and pressed down hard. But then I heard Thorin's voice in my memory, not from minutes ago, but from the journal. A soul untainted by their poisonous pride, and his question, "Does it frighten you?" I looked up at Celine, meeting her cruel gaze. The king's principles built a kingdom from nothing, I said, my voice gaining strength. I think they are stronger than the shifting winds of convenience, my lady, but thank you for your It is a test, Calum said quietly. They probe for weakness. They have heard of the northern tribute. His dark eyes flicked to me for an instant. They wonder if it signifies distraction or division. Thorin's gaze was fixed on the map. We will respond with strength, but measured, a show of force at the border, coupled with a formal diplomatic envoy reiterating our treaties. He looked at his commanders. Standard procedure. The men nodded, already discussing troop movements and supply lines. I listened, the political chess game unfolding in terms of men and miles. It was daunting. And then, as Rylan unrolled a smaller scroll, the intercepted message itself, something caught my eye. The parchment. It was of fine quality, yes, but the watermark. I had seen that particular lattice pattern before, just yesterday in the library, while reshelving some of the kingdom's older trade ledgers. It was a mark used by a specific paper mill in the western reaches, a mill whose expensive product was almost exclusively bought by... My heart began to pound. It was a tiny detail, an insignificant thing, the kind of thing only a ghost, used to observing from the shadows, would notice. "The paper," I blurted out. The conversation stopped. 4 pairs of warriors' eyes and the king's piercing silver gaze locked onto me. I flinched under the weight of their attention. "What about the paper, Ilara?" asked Thorin, his voice carefully neutral. I'm sorry, it's nothing. I shouldn't have..." "You saw something," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Tell me." I took a shaky breath and pointed a trembling finger at the scroll. "The watermark, the lattice and crown. That paper comes from the Silverwood Mill in the western reaches." I forced myself to meet his eyes. "But the Silverfangs, their territory is in the eastern Frost Plains. According to your own trade ledgers from 3 years ago, which I was reshelving, they have never imported paper from the west. It's too costly, and they have their own mills. They use a simpler reed pulp paper with a wolf's head watermark." A dead silence filled the room. The commanders stared at the parchment as if it had just sprouted fangs. Thorin's expression did not change, but a new, fierce intensity lit his eyes. He leaned forward, peering at the watermark. "Calum, fetch the ledger she mentioned, and bring a sample of genuine Silverfang correspondence from the archives. Now." Calum vanished. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. I sat frozen, wishing I could disappear into the stone of the chair. I had overstepped. I had spoken of ledgers and watermarks in a room where men spoke of war. Calum returned swiftly, bearing a thick ledger and a separate, rougher-looking scroll. He laid them on the table beside the intercepted message. The difference was immediate. The new scroll had a crude, stamped wolf's head. The intercepted message bore the elegant, embossed lattice and crown. "By the blood of the first wolf," Rylan breathed, his eyes wide. Thorin looked from the papers to me. "You are certain of this?" I whispered. "The ledger entry is on page 47. It details a trade dispute. The Silverwood merchant was complaining the Silverfangs never bought his wares, only the cheaper eastern product." Thorin didn't check the ledger. I hesitated, bound by Thorin's command of secrecy. But Orin was no fool, and his loyalty was as solid as the mountains. "There is sickness," I said carefully, choosing my words. "Not of the body, but of loyalty. A poison trying to spread." Orin nodded slowly, his wise eyes grave. "Then we must be the antidote. Watchfulness is a form of medicine too, Alara. Observe, but do not let the poison of suspicion cloud your own heart. The mind that sees the trap must remain clear, not become part of the snare." His advice was a lifeline. I couldn't let paranoia cripple me. I had to do what I did best, observe, quietly, from the edges. Over the next few days, I became a ghost again, but this time by choice and with purpose. I lingered in corridors, not to hide, but to listen to snatches of conversation. I noted who met with whom in shadowed corners of the garden. I watched the comings and goings at the mews, the stables, the kitchens. I saw nothing overtly treasonous, only the normal pulse of court life, alliances forming, grievances whispered, flirtations blooming. But then, on the 3rd day, I saw it. I was in a little-used upper gallery that overlooked one of the smaller interior courtyards, a place where courtiers often took private air. I was searching for a specific illustrated botanical text rumored to be misfiled there. As I scanned the shelves, movement below caught my eye.
Lord Corbin, a minor noble known for his booming laugh and extravagant taste, was speaking with a man I did not recognize, a merchant by his fine but practical clothes. Their conversation seemed intense. Lord Corbin passed the man a small, heavy-looking leather pouch. The merchant weighed it in his hand, nodded once, and slipped it into his coat. Then he handed Corbin a slim, cylindrical case, the kind used for documents or maps. A simple transaction, but something about it felt furtive. The courtyard was not entirely private. They were in plain sight, yet they chose a moment when it was otherwise empty, and Lord Corbin's usual joviality was absent. His face was tight, serious. I remembered the forged message, the expensive paper. Lord Corbin was famously wealthy, with trading connections across the realms. Could he acquire silverwood paper? Easily. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This was it, a clue. I had to tell Thorin. I turned to leave the gallery and nearly collided with a solid, warm form. "Ilara," King Thorin said, his hands coming up to steady me. He was alone, his expression one of mild curiosity. "You look as if you've seen one of the keep's legendary ghosts." For a moment, I could only stare at him, my mind screaming with what I'd just witnessed. "Your Majesty, I was looking for a book." His silver eyes searched my face, seeing past the feeble excuse. "And did you find what you were looking for?" he asked softly, meaningfully. I glanced over the railing. Below, the courtyard was now empty. Lord Corbin and the merchant were gone. The evidence had vanished with them. "I'm not sure," I whispered, frustration and fear tangling in my voice. "I thought I did, but it's gone." Thorin followed my gaze to the empty courtyard, then back to my face. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He didn't press. Instead, he offered his arm. "Walk with me." We walked in silence for a time, through the quieter halls of Belest Wing. The tension in me was a coiled spring. "Suspicion is a bitter brew," he said at last, his voice low. "It stains everything it touches. You must be certain, Ilara."
Fear was a cold, sharp stone in my throat. I stood frozen in the shadowed corridor long after Celine's scent had faded and the wall had sealed itself back into perfect, silent stone. 2 traitors, a lord with a buyer's loyalty and a lady with a viper's ambition, and they knew about secret ways inside the very heart of the keep. At the first sign of real danger, come to me. Thorin's command echoed in my mind. This was more than a sign. This was the danger itself, coiled and ready. But the reception was still in full swing in the grand hall. To burst in, to pull the king away now, would cause the very scene the traitors might use as cover or distraction. I had to be smarter. I had to be a ghost with a message. I turned and practically ran in the opposite direction, my mind racing. Varya. I needed to find Captain Varya. She would know what to do, how to get to Thorin quietly. I found her not in the guard rooms, but in the training yard, overseeing the evening drills of the newer recruits. The clash of practice swords and grunts of effort filled the cold air. When she saw my face, she dismissed the soldiers with a sharp gesture and strode over. "Ilara, what is it?" "The hidden door, in the west corridor, near the archives," I gasped, my words tumbling out. "Lord Corbin used it, and Lady Celine saw him. They knew each other. They were both afraid of being seen. They're working together." All warmth drained from Varya's scarred face, replaced with a soldier's cold focus. "Show me, now." We moved through the keep like 2 shadows, swift and silent. When we reached the junction, I pointed to the stone, a slightly darker patch in the wall, indistinguishable unless you knew what to look for. Varya examined it with a predator's intensity, running her fingers along the edges. "I know of this passage," she murmured, her voice low and deadly. "It leads to the old wine cellars, and from there outside the walls through a forgotten drainage culvert. It was sealed decades ago by Thorin's father." Her jaw tightened. Apparently, someone unsealed it. She didn't try to open it. Instead, she grasped my arm.
You must go to your chambers, lock the door, do not open it for anyone but me, the king, or Calum. Do you understand? But you need to tell the king. I will find Thorin and Calum. We will set a net at both ends of this rabbit hole. Her eyes bored into mine. You have done your part, Alara, brilliantly. Now let the hunters do theirs. Go, please. The please did it. The fierce warrior was asking, not commanding, out of concern for me. I nodded and fled back toward the safety of the West Wing. My chambers felt like a trap, not a sanctuary. Every tick of the clock on the mantel was a hammer blow. I paced, my mind conjuring images of Corbin and Selene, of hidden knives and sudden ambushes. What was their plan? Assassination? Letting an enemy force inside? The forged letter made sense now. They wanted to cripple the kingdom with a war, leaving it vulnerable to what? A coup? The door latch rattled. I froze, my blood turning to ice. It wasn't a knock, it was someone trying the handle. Lady Alara? A male voice, muffled by the thick wood. Young, familiar, one of the understewards. The king requests your presence in the rose parlor, immediately. My heart stopped. The rose parlor was in the opposite wing, a private receiving room. Why would Thorin summon me there, now, in the middle of a crisis? And why send a steward, not Varya or Calum? Do not open it for anyone but me, the king, or Calum.
I have you, he breathed, his voice a vibration in his chest. You're safe. He didn't set me down. He simply turned and carried me, moving swiftly and silently through the labyrinthian garden paths, away from the West Wing, until we reached a small, fortified guard post nestled against the inner curtain wall. Varya and Calum were already there, along with a squad of stone-faced royal guards. Thorin set me gently on a bench inside. Your ankle. It's nothing, I insisted, though pain shot up my leg. The steward, at my door. We know, Calum said, his expression grim. He has been detained. He was in Corbin's pay. They were to bring you to the wine cellars to silence you before you could speak. A cold nausea swept through me. Silenced, thrown down a dark hole, my death just another mystery. Thorin knelt before me, his eyes blazing with a fury so controlled it was more terrifying than any shout. Did they hurt you? No, I jumped. The words sounded absurd. A flicker of awe crossed Varya's face. You jumped the balcony gap with a gown on? Thorin's gaze swept over me, from my wild hair to my torn slippers, and the fury in his eyes softened into something else, something fierce and proud. Of course you did. He stood. The net is closing. We have men at the culvert exit and inside the cellars. They are trapped in their own nest. He looked at me, his decision firm. You will stay here with 2 guards. You are not to move. But I want to see, I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. I need to see it end. Thorin studied me. He saw the fear, but he also saw the determination beneath it, the need to confront the shadow that had chased me to a balcony's edge. He gave a single sharp nod. Very well, but you stay behind Varya. At the first sign of trouble, you are removed. Is that clear? It was a command this time. I nodded. We moved through the darkened underbelly of the keep, a silent procession of vengeance. The air grew cold and damp. We entered the vast, vaulted wine cellars, the air thick with the scent of earth and old oak. Torchlight pushed back the darkness, illuminating racks of dusty bottles, and in the center, a scene of captured panic. Lord Corbin and Lady Selene stood surrounded by royal guards. A burly man in merchant's clothes, the one from the courtyard, was with them, along with 2 rough-looking accomplices. On a makeshift table lay maps of the keep, coded messages, and a small, deadly-looking crossbow. Selene's mask was gone. Her beautiful face was twisted with rage and fear. Corbin looked like a deflated bladder, sweating profusely. Thorin, Selene spat as we entered.
You think you've won? You are a fool playing king with other people's rejects. This kingdom is a sickness." Thorin walked forward, his calm absolute, a glacier facing a shrieking gale. "The only sickness here is your treachery, Selene, and it ends tonight." His eyes shifted to Corbin. "The silverwood paper was a nice touch, expensive. I assume you meant to bill your true master for it. Who is he? Who pays you to sow war at my borders?" Corbin stammered, his eyes darting to Selene. It was Selene who answered, her voice a venomous hiss. "The true ruler of these lands, the one whose bloodline you stole, my brother." The revelation hit the silent cellar like a thunderclap. Selene's brother, the disgraced Prince Kieran, who had tried to assassinate his own father, Thorin's predecessor, and had fled into exile years ago. "Kieran," Thorin said, the name.
"She was wrong, you know," he said quietly, breaking the silence. I didn't need to ask who he meant. Selene's final venomous words were seared into my mind. "You think he cares for you? You are just a tool." "I know," I whispered, but the doubt must have lingered in my eyes. He leaned forward, setting his glass down with a soft click. "Ilara, look at me." I did. His gaze was intense, earnest. "What you did tonight, you were not a tool. A tool is wielded without thought. You thought, you observed, you connected threads no one else saw. You showed courage that would make my most seasoned warriors proud. And then, when threatened, you used your wits and your will to survive." He shook his head, a faint, amazed smile touching his lips. "You were a partner in uncovering this treachery, an indispensable one." The word partner vibrated in the air between us. It was a title of respect, of equality. It meant more to me than any praise. "What will happen to them?" I asked, to steer the conversation from the dangerous warmth spreading in my chest. The light in his eyes hardened. "Justice, a public trial. Their conspiracy will be laid bare for all the court to see. The shadow of Kieran's ambition ends here." He sighed, the weight of kingship settling back on his shoulders. "But Selene, her betrayal is a personal one. She was welcomed here, given status. Her bitterness festered in a place meant for healing." He looked into the fire. "It is a failure of my court, of my ability to see the rot within." "You couldn't have known," I said softly. "I should have," he replied, his voice edged with self-reproach. "It is my duty to know, to protect those under my care from such poison." His eyes lifted to mine again, and the guilt in them was for me. "You were put in mortal danger because I did not root it out sooner, because my trust in the sanctity of these walls was misplaced. For that, I am truly sorry." His apology was so sincere, so heavy with responsibility, it stole my breath. I stood there for a long time, leaning against the doorframe, my injured ankle forgotten, my whole being focused on the place where his fingers had touched my skin. He was wrong about one thing. The nightmares did come, but they were not of Selene or Corbin or falling. They were fragmented, fevered dreams of silver eyes in the dark, of a strong arm catching me, of the word partner whispered like a promise. I woke at dawn, the first gray light seeping through the windows. My ankle was a dull throb, but my heart? My heart was a wild, hopeful thing beating against my ribs. Mirren helped me dress and brought a breakfast tray. As I ate, a sealed note was delivered. The handwriting on the outside was strong and familiar. "Ilara, the court will be assembled at noon. The truth will be told. Your presence is requested but not required. Do only what your strength allows. T." He had signed it not with his title but with the initial he'd asked me to use, a private acknowledgement, a shared space. I looked at the note, then at my bandaged ankle. I thought of Selene's sneer, of Corbin's sweat-soaked fear, of the hidden door and the forged letter. My strength allowed it. I would be there.
It was time for the ghost to step into the light. Noon arrived, cold and clear. The hall of echoes was packed, a sea of tense, murmuring faces. News of the nighttime arrests had spread like wildfire, twisting into a dozen lurid rumors. The air hummed with a fearful, hungry curiosity. Mirren helped me into a simple gown of dove gray, the color of truth before it is written. She braided my hair in a severe crown, reminding me of the girl who had left Moonhaven, but the face in the mirror was different. There were shadows under my eyes from a sleepless night, but the eyes themselves, they were no longer downcast. They held a quiet resolve. I used a walking stick Master Oren had provided, my bandaged ankle a badge of the previous night's ordeal. As I entered the hall, leaning on the stick, a ripple of silence spread out from me. Every eye followed my slow, deliberate progress toward the high dais. I saw shock, speculation, pity, and from a few corners, lingering malice. I ignored them all. My gaze was fixed on the throne. King Thorin sat upon it, dressed not in celebratory silks, but in the stark black and silver of formal judgment. He looked every inch the implacable monarch, his face carved from winter stone. But as I drew nearer, his silver eyes found mine. Just for a heartbeat, the stone softened, a flicker of reassurance, of shared understanding. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. He had a chair placed for me at the foot of the dais, to the side, a place of witness, not of judgment. It was a considerate distance, allowing me to be seen without being the focus. I sat, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Bring forth the accused," Thorin's voice rang out, silencing the last whispers. Guards led in Lord Corbin and Lady Selene. They were shackled, stripped of their finery, dressed. Thorin's gaze then fell upon Selene. It was colder than the mountain glaciers. "Lady Selene, your betrayal cuts deepest, for it was dressed in the robes of kinship you were offered. For conspiracy and attempted murder, the sentence is death." A gasp swept the hall. Selene flinched, the first crack in her icy armor. Thorin continued, his voice dropping into a register of final, terrible judgment. "But you will not die by sword or axe. You sought to spread poison. You will live with it. You are exiled, banished beyond the farthest borders of any allied territory, with nothing but the clothes on your back. You will live out your days knowing your brother's cause is ash, your name is curse, and the kingdom you sought to break stands stronger than ever for your failure." It was a punishment far crueler than death, to be made irrelevant, to be erased. Selene's defiance shattered, her face went ashen, her eyes wide with a horror more profound than any fear of a blade. She was marched away, not struggling but broken, a hollow shell. The hall erupted in murmurs. The judgment was severe, just, and brilliantly symbolic. Thorin had not just punished crime, he had reaffirmed the very foundation of his rule, strength through unity, mercy for the redeemable, and utter annihilation for treachery. As the court began to disperse, buzzing with the day's drama, Thorin stepped down from the dais and came to me. He offered his arm. "You should not be walking on that." I took his arm, leaning on him more than the stick. He led me not out of the hall, but through a side entrance into a quiet, sunlit anteroom. Once the door closed, the public mask fell away. The weariness returned to his eyes, but so did a profound relief. "You were extraordinary," he said simply. "I just told them what I saw." "You stood before the entire court, injured, and spoke the truth without flinching. You claimed your own strength. That is not just anything, Alara. That is everything." He looked down at me, his expression solemn. "The court sees you differently now. They see the king's witness, the unraveler of treason. They will not dismiss you as a broken Omega again." "And you?" I dared to ask, my voice barely a whisper. How do you see me? He was silent for a long moment, his silver eyes searching my face as if memorizing it. I see the woman who jumped a balcony to escape a killer, the scholar who found a war in a watermark, the partner who stood beside me in the dark. He lifted his hand, and again, with that heart-stopping tenderness, he brushed his knuckles against my cheek. I see Ilara, and she is remarkable. The word hung between us, a fragile, beautiful thing. My breath caught, the world narrowed to the feel of his touch, the intensity of his gaze. A practical, hurried knock at the door shattered the moment. Calum entered, his expression urgent. Your Majesty, apologies. The scouts have returned from the Eastern Pass. There's a situation. It requires your immediate attention. Thorin's hand fell away. The king returned, the weight of the crown settling back onto his brow. He gave me one last long look, a promise, an apology, a farewell, before turning to his lieutenant. I'll come now. He glanced back at me. Rest, that is an order. And then he was gone, swept back into the tide of kingship. I stood alone in the sunlit. King Thorin was already there when I entered, flanked by Varya. He sat in a high-backed chair, every inch the sovereign receiving a foreign delegation. His eyes met mine as I came in, and for a fleeting second I saw something, a flicker of the man from the cellar, a spark of concern, before it was shuttered away behind formality. He gestured for me to take the seat beside his, a place of honor that felt like a lie. The doors opened, and the delegation from Moonhaven entered. Alpha Borin, Beta Kale, Councilman Jareth. The sight of them was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. They looked smaller somehow, diminished in this elegant room. Their eyes widened as they took me in. I saw confusion, then a dawning, uncomfortable reassessment. They bowed to Thorin, their movements stiff. Your Majesty, Borin began, his voice lacking its usual thunder. We come to reaffirm our pack's allegiance and to discuss the terms of our agreement. The terms stand, Thorin said, his voice cool as polished steel. Your tribute has been received. The alliance is sealed. Jareth's gaze, sharp and hateful as ever, slithered over to me. And the tribute herself? We had heard tales of her involvement in recent unpleasantness. We wished to ascertain her condition, to ensure she has not brought disgrace upon our pack's name through her inherent weaknesses. The old familiar poison dripped in the court of a king who had seen my strength. Rage, hot and clean, burned through the cold ache in my chest. Before Thorin could respond, and I saw his jaw tighten, I spoke. You may ascertain my condition for yourself, Councilman, I said, my voice clear and cutting in the quiet room. I am well. I am learning the art of healing. I recently helped uncover a treasonous plot against this crown. My inherent weaknesses, as you call them, proved rather useful in seeing what others wished to hide. Jareth recoiled as if slapped. Beta Kale's eyes held a grim satisfaction. Alpha Borin looked ashamed. Thorin's posture shifted subtly. He didn't look at me, but I felt his attention sharpen, his silent approval a warmth at my side. Indeed, Thorin said, leaning forward slightly, Lady Alara's unique strengths have been of great service to my kingdom, a service your pack, in its limited wisdom, failed to perceive. He let the insult hang, watching them squirm. But you did not come all this way to check on her health. What do you truly want? Borin cleared his throat, uncomfortable. The winter has been harsh in the mountains. Our stores are low. We had hoped, in the spirit of our new alliance, for aid, grain, medicine. They came to beg. The mighty Moonhaven pack, who valued only strength, had come to beg from the king they had tried to insult with me. The irony was so perfect it was painful. Thorin steepled his fingers. So why should I aid a pack that sent me a hidden insult, hoping for my displeasure? We made a error of judgment, Borin admitted, the words costing him. We misunderstood your values. You misunderstood value, Thorin corrected, his gaze sweeping over them. You saw a person and saw waste. I saw potential. You come to me now because your old ways have left you hungry. There is a certain poetry to it. He was toying with them, and they knew it. Their pride was being flayed in front of the one they had cast out. The aid will be granted, Thorin said finally, and they sagged with relief. But with conditions. You will adopt a new trade route that benefits my merchants. You will send 2 of your young ones here each year to be educated, in healing, in strategy, in— Winter tightened its grip on Valerius, sheathing the black stone towers in ice and silencing the world under a thick blanket of snow. The silence in the keep, however, was of a different kind, a tense, waiting quiet. The Mountain Clan envoys had brought not just agitation, but threats. Talks had stalled. Thorin was more absent than ever, his presence reduced to rumors of all-night councils and the sight of armed patrols departing through the main gate at dawn. I kept to my routine like a lifeline: healing hall, library, my own chambers. The work was a meditation, a way to still the tempest of confusion in my mind. Master Orin watched me with knowing eyes, but said nothing. The confrontation with Moonhaven had been a closure of sorts, but it had also ripped open a deeper wound. I had faced my past and stood unbroken. Now I had to face my present and the uncertain, painful future it promised. One afternoon, as I was inventorying stores of feverfew and skullcap, Calum appeared in the doorway of the healing hall. He was dressed for travel, his dark cloak dusted with snow. "Lady Alara," he said, his usually impassive face lined with fatigue. "A moment?" I followed him into an empty side chamber. "You're leaving?" "With a contingent of guards, to reinforce the eastern outpost. The Mountain Clan is mobilizing. It may come to more than words." He studied me. "The king asked me to give you a message." My heart gave a foolish, traitorous leap. "He did?" "He said to tell you that the book you were reading, the one on star navigation, the calculations on page 112 are flawed. The scholar confused the winter constellations of the northern and southern hemispheres." Calum delivered the message with a perfectly straight face. I stared at him. That was it? A correction on astronomical charts? While he marched toward potential war? The leap of my heart crashed into a pit of cold disappointment. "I see. Thank you." Calum's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. "He also said that when he returns, he will show you the correct ones, personally, under the actual stars." He paused, his dark eyes earnest. "He wanted you to have something to look forward to, a promise of a conversation he very much intends to have." The cold disappointment evaporated, replaced by a warmth so intense it was terrifying. A promise, under the stars, not a king's command, but a man's invitation. It was a lifeline thrown across the chasm of his duty. "Thank you, Calum," I whispered, my throat tight. He nodded. "Be well, Ilara, and be watchful. The keep is secure, but not everyone was pleased with the outcome of the recent trial. Shadows linger." With that ominous, typical Calum warning, he was gone. The promise was a small, bright coal in the gloom of the following days. I carried it with me, a secret warmth against the winter. I found the navigation book and looked at page 112, the flawed calculations. Thorin had not just remembered a random book, he had remembered my book, my interest. He had been paying attention even from afar. It changed everything and nothing. He was still gone. The threat of conflict still loomed, but the emptiness inside me was no longer a hollow ache. It was an anticipation, a waiting. That waiting was shattered a week later. It happened in the library. I was searching for a text on high-altitude herbology, thinking the mountain conflict might create a need for such knowledge. The great room was empty, the silence profound, broken only by the sigh of wind against the high windows. I was on a rolling ladder, reaching for a heavy.
Hours ticked by. The winter night fell early, plunging my room into deep blue twilight. I lit no candles, preferring the dark. I stood at the balcony doors, looking out at the snow-shrouded city, thinking of Thorin under a different, colder sky, perhaps facing his own threat. Then I heard it, not from the corridor, but from the balcony. A faint scrape. My breath froze. I peered through the glass. A dark shape was grappling onto my balcony railing from below, a man climbing the same treacherous route I had contemplated. He hauled himself over and stood, silhouetted against the snow-lit sky. He was dressed in dark, nondescript clothes, a hood shadowing his face. He was at my balcony door, testing the handle. The guard was outside my chamber door. They would never hear. This was a different kind of trap. Evander's threat hadn't been idle. They hadn't just wanted to move their contraband. They wanted to silence the witness for good. The handle rattled, then jiggled more forcefully. He was picking the lock. Terror held me frozen for a second. Then a cold, clear clarity descended. This was not Moonhaven. This was not a punishment I had to endure. This was my home, and I would fight for it. My eyes darted around the dark room. The fire poker, too far. The heavy candlestick on the mantel. I crept toward it, my bare feet silent on the rug. My fingers closed around the cold, solid silver. The balcony door lock gave way with a soft click. The door swung open, letting in a blast of frigid air and the shadowy figure. He stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the deeper dark of the room. I didn't scream. I didn't wait. I stepped out from behind the high back of a chair and swung the candlestick with all my strength. It connected with his shoulder with a sickening thud. He grunted in pain and surprise, stumbling sideways. I didn't hesitate. I swung again, this time aiming for his head. He ducked, and the candlestick smashed into a small side table, sending a porcelain vase crashing to the floor. The sound was like a thunderclap in the silent room. "You little," he snarled, lunging for me. I scrambled back, tripping over a footstool and falling hard. He loomed over me, his hand reaching for my throat. Then the main chamber door burst open. The two guards flooded in, swords drawn. In an instant, the intruder was seized, disarmed, and pinned to the ground. Panting, I was helped to my feet by one of the guards. The intruder's hood was pulled back, revealing the pale, furious face of a young man I recognized, one of Evander's household guards. Minutes later, Varya arrived, her boots ringing on the floor, her expression thunderous. She took in the scene, the broken vase, the candlestick in my hand, the captured assassin. "We caught the two at the postern gate with a chest of stolen jewels and documents," she reported, her voice tight. "They named Evander. We were on our way to arrest him when we heard the commotion here." She looked at me, her gaze sweeping from my wild hair to my white-knuckled grip on the weapon. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, still trembling. "No." Varya walked over to the captured man, her rage a palpable force. She leaned down, her voice a deadly whisper. "You touched one of mine. You came into her space." She straightened and looked at her guards. "Take him to the black cells, next to his master. Tell the interrogators they have my permission to be thorough." As the man was dragged away, Varya came to me. She gently pried the candlestick from my grip. "You fought."
His letter changed my waiting from a passive ache to an active preparation. If I was essential, then I would become more than a survivor. I would become a part of the keep's heartbeat, not just a ghost in its halls. I went to Master Orin with a new determination. Teach me everything, not just herbs and bandages. Teach me about battlefield triage, about poisons and their antidotes, about the healing of mind and spirit after trauma. Orin studied me. his old eyes crinkling at the corners. "The student has decided to become a master. I need to be ready," I said simply. He nodded, and my education deepened. I learned to set bones, to stitch deep gashes, to recognize the glassy stare of shock. I learned which plants could calm a panicked mind as well as they could lower a fever. I began assisting with the veteran soldiers who came to the halls with old wounds that still ached, listening to their stories, offering not just poultices but a quiet, understanding ear. I also sought out Varya. Teach me to defend myself, not to be a warrior, but to not be a victim. She agreed without hesitation. In a secluded corner of the training grounds, she began to teach me simple, brutal efficiency. How to break a grip, where to strike to disable, how to use my smaller size as an advantage. "You have good instincts," she grunted after I successfully twisted out of a hold for the third time. "You don't freeze, you adapt. That's half the battle." I was changing. My body grew stronger, my hands more sure. My mind, always observant, now catalogued exits, assessed threats, and planned responses as naturally as it identified herbs. The ghost was being reforged in fire and resolve. One evening, as I was leaving the healing halls, I passed the open doors of the Grand Strategy Room. A group of younger officers and scholars were inside, gathered around a large map, debating supply lines for the eastern garrison. I paused, listening. One officer was insisting on a route through the Black Wood, citing speed. A scholar gently pointed out that the Black Wood was prone to early spring floods that weren't marked on their older map. I recognized the scholar's correction. It was based on a footnote in a regional climate history I'd read just the previous week. Without thinking, I stepped into the doorway. The scholar is correct. All heads turned to me. I ignored the surprise on some faces. The Annals of the Northern Valleys, Volume 3, documents 3 consecutive springs where the Blackwood Ford was impassable until late Feason due to snowmelt from the Dragon's Teeth peaks. The alternate route, though longer, follows a granite ridge. It's slower, but reliable. The room fell silent. The young officer blinked. The scholar smiled. "Thank you, Lady Alara. I knew I had read it somewhere." I merely nodded and continued on my way, my heart pounding. I had not just observed, I had contributed to the kingdom's logistics. It was a small thing, but it felt immense. News of this, too, filtered through the keep. The Omega who knew herbs, who fought off assassins, who corrected military supply routes. The court's wariness began to mix with a grudging, genuine respect. Finally, after a month of torturous negotiations and a tense standoff that never quite erupted into battle, word came. The Mountain Clan had accepted terms. A treaty was signed. The king was returning. The day of his return, Valerius erupted in celebration. Banners flew, bells. "I don't know how to be a queen," I whispered, the confession torn from me. "I am not asking for a queen," he said, his voice firm. "I am asking for Alara, the woman who sees the truth in watermarks and the strength in broken things, the woman who fights for her home with a candlestick, the woman I think of when I look at the stars." He leaned his forehead against mine, his eyes closing for a brief second. "I am asking you to stay, not in the shadows, not as a guest, but here, with me, in the light, as my equal in all the ways that matter." The world stopped. The library, the keep, the kingdom, all faded into a blur. There was only his touch, his words, his breath mingling with mine. This was the answer, not a guarantee of ease, but a promise of shared burden. Not a fairy tale, but a choice, a terrifying, magnificent choice. I lifted my hand and placed it over his, where it rested against my cheek. I looked into his winter silver eyes and saw my future, challenging, dangerous, beautiful, reflected there. "The calculations on page 112, I said, my voice steady now, sure. "You promised to show me the correct ones." A real, full smile broke across his face, transforming the weary king back into the man from the journal, the man who built kingdoms from hope. "Yes, I did. Tonight, the sky is clear." He was home, the promise was kept, and the ghost was gone forever. In her place stood a woman, her hand in the king's, ready to face whatever came next, under the vast and waiting stars. The world did not magically transform after that moment in the library. There was no grand announcement, no crowning ceremony. Thorin's return was immediately swallowed by the mountain of deferred rule, reports to hear, judgments to pass, a kingdom to reassure. Yet everything had changed. A silent, fundamental shift had occurred, and the keep seemed to breathe differently around us. Our stargazing was postponed by a late council meeting, but the promise hung in the air, a tangible thing. When we passed in corridors, his touch was no longer fleeting, a hand on my arm, a studying presence at my back. His gaze held mine longer, a private conversation in a crowded room. The court noticed. Whispers grew, but they were now tinged with curiosity, not malice. The king's regard was clear, and the object of that regard had proven she was not easily dismantled. A formal dinner was held a few nights later to celebrate the peace with the mountain clan. I wore a gown the color of the midnight sky, and Thorin, from the head of the table, watched me with an expression that made my skin warm. After the last course, he stood, raising his goblet. "A toast," his voice rang out, "to peace hard won, to allies newly made, and to the quiet strengths that safeguard a kingdom, often unseen, but always essential." His eyes found mine, and the entire court followed his gaze. "To clear sight, and to courage." It was as close to a public declaration as he would give for now, and it was enough. Glasses were raised, the toast echoed. I sipped my wine, feeling the weight and warmth of hundreds of eyes, but for the first time it did not feel like a burden. It felt like an acknowledgement. Later, as the feast dissolved into music and conversation, Thorin appeared at my side. "Walk with me," he said, his voice low. It was not a request from a king, but an offer from a man. We slipped away from the noise, through the now.
It was not a kiss of passion, but of promise, of sealing a covenant. It was soft, tentative, and utterly profound. His breath hitched, and then his arms came around me, pulling me close against the solid warmth of his chest, deepening the kiss from a promise into a claiming, and from a claiming into a homecoming. When we finally parted, foreheads resting together, the world had reordered itself. The stars were the same, but the sky felt new. "Then it is decided," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. A week later, he called a private gathering in the small throne room used for family and close council. Varya, Rylan, Calem, Orin, and Mirren were there. Thorin stood before them, me at his side, our hands joined. "You are my family," he said to them, his voice echoing in the intimate space. "You have built this kingdom with me. Today I ask you to welcome a new member to its foundation." He looked down at me, his silver eyes shining. "Ilara has agreed to become my wife, my queen, my true partner in rule." There were no gasps of surprise, only deep, knowing smiles. Varya was the first to step forward. She didn't bow, she clasped my free hand in her warrior's grip. "Welcome to the pack, sister." One by one they came, Rylan's crushing, brief hug, Calem's solemn, respectful nod, and a rare, genuine smile. Orin's blessing, his eyes moist. Mirren's joyful tears and embrace. It was official, yet private. Real, yet ours.
Thorin explained there would be a formal ceremony for the court and the kingdom in the spring, but this, he said, was the true bonding, the pack's acceptance. That night, as a light snow began to fall, Thorin led me to the royal gardens, now a wonderland of white and silence. "There is one more thing," he said, his breath making plumes in the air, "a tradition for the pack." He stepped away from me into an open, snow-dusted glade. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not the king, but the wolf. He let go of his human form. The shift was not a violent explosion of bone and sinew I was used to from Moonhaven's displays of dominance. It was a fluid, powerful melting, like dark water taking a new shape. Where the man had stood, now stood a wolf of legend. He was enormous, a creature of myth made flesh. His fur was the same black as his hair, with silver-tipped guard hairs that glimmed in the moonlight like frost. His eyes were the same piercing silver. He was power and grace incarnate, a king in his purest form. He lowered his great head and looked at me, waiting. My heart hammered, my own wolf stirred, not in fear, but in answer, a longing I had never felt before. This was the test, the final truth. I closed my eyes, not trying to force the shift as I always had, with desperation and shame. Instead, I thought of trust, of the library, of the Star Tower, of his words, a partner whose howl harmonizes with his own. I let go. The shift was different. It was not a struggle. It was a release, a sigh. My bones realigned with a series of soft pops, my skin rippled with warmth, and the world sharpened into 1,000 new scents and sounds. I looked down and saw not the massive paws of a warrior, but the small, neat paws of a she-wolf, my fur the same pale silver blonde as my hair. I was still small, but I felt whole, complete. My wolf was not a shadow. She was me. Thorin's great wolf approached, his head still lowered. He nuzzled my neck gently, a wolf's kiss. Then he lifted his majestic head to the moon-washed sky and let out a deep, resonant howl. It was a song of the
"Elara," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed courtyard, no trace of the formal king in it. "I do not promise you a life of ease. I promise you a life of purpose. I do not promise to shield you from every storm, but to stand with you through all of them. I offer you not just a crown, but my heart, my trust, my unwavering faith in the woman who taught a king to see with clearer eyes. Will you rule with me?" Tears blurred my vision, but my voice was clear as a bell. "Thorin, I do not promise to be a traditional queen. I promise to be your true partner. I promise to see what others miss, to heal what is broken, and to stand for the strength found in kindness and wisdom. I offer you not just my loyalty, but my truth, my courage, my heart. I will rule with you." It was a vow between partners, not a subject to a monarch. The elder smiled, seeing the new tradition being born before him. Then came the crowning. An attendant brought forward 2 circlets on a velvet pillow, not the heavy, gem-encrusted crown of state, but 2 lighter bands of intertwined silver and dark iron. Thorin took the smaller one. "This band is forged from the iron of the first outpost my fledgling pack defended," he said, for me and all to hear. "And this silver is from the first vein of ore discovered in our mountains, a symbol of prosperity born from unity." He lifted it. "It is a crown of our history and of our future." Gently he placed it on my brow. It was cool, light, and felt not like a weight, but like a completion. I took the larger matching circlet and placed it on his dark hair. "And this," I said, the words coming to me as if I had always known them, "is a crown worn not by a solitary ruler, but by the heart of a pack. May it always be a reminder that your strength is multiplied by those who stand with you." A profound silence held the courtyard, followed by a roar of approval that shook the very stones of the keep. It was the sound of a kingdom embracing its new beginning. The feast that followed was legendary, but Thorin and I stole away from the merriment as twilight painted the sky in peach and lavender. We walked, hand in hand, to the highest balcony of the astronomy tower, the place of our first true promise. Below, the city of Valerius was a sea of twinkling lights, celebrations spilling into every street. The sounds of music and joy floated up to us on the warm spring breeze. "It's done,"